refresh that other page. The very first thing was a spoken word. Let there be light. And there was light. A sound created DNA. Sounds are important. That's how we create, one of the ways. So yeah, that becomes important. So we're streaming.
Yes.
And you refreshed.
Yes, I did.
And do we have a red live button?
We do.
Did you click the red live button?
I did.
Okay, and do you see me waving at you? In the screen it should have appeared. You should see me live on, okay, we're good. Welcome, Little Evil.
Thank you.
We're just getting a couple
Golden
things straight. Thank you.
And George.
We have a new tech crew
Yeah,
tonight.
George.
Yeah.
Because our usual crew was down visiting Coyote and his peeps over the weekend, and they're not back yet. They'll get back tomorrow. So
That's a long drive.
I've made that drive way too many times.
How many hours is it?
It depends on your exact location. He just moved this last year. So he's now another half hour or farther away. So it's like a 13-hour drive when you throw in gas breaks and biology breaks.
Right.
Hi, everybody out there in Internet TV land. We are live from Mount Shasta on Monday night. This is the Toltec Discussions with Golden Eagle. I am your host, Golden Eagle. And we've got some Toltecas here in the studio audience. I'm hoping we get a few more online. And I hope we get a few more visitors online who are looking at this work saying, what's up with that? So we are in the midst of examining Toltec philosophy by comparing it to some work of some other authors over the years who have been brushing up against what can be described as esoteric work and tapping into the higher planes of reality, sometimes known as the unseen planes, sometimes known as the higher dimensions, sometimes known as the macro dimensions, because that's really part of any of the higher level work of any spiritual system or any religion that is legitimate will always have the higher work. So the book we're going to be talking about tonight is, well, let me back up. No. Well, the book is The Human Biological Machine as a Transformational Apparatus. And I have another copy that has the cool E.J. Gold art on the cover. I couldn't find it tonight. So anyway, all my notes are in this one, the one that looks like that. Now, what I like about the other edition is that it has a very, very tremendous introduction in it. I think this is the older one that doesn't have an introduction in it. And this is one of, this book is an enigma to a lot of people. It's an enigma in one sense, in that it's a more advanced book than one would expect to be asked to read as an introduction to the work at hand. And that's a very deliberate, calculated act of cruelty on my part, to make people read something that's hard, because I get enjoyment in that kind of thing. Well, what are some of the other complaints I've heard?
About Dion's books.
Well, about these books in general.
The language.
But, yeah. So, no, seriously. I like poking fun at myself, because if you can't make fun of yourself, then you're in the wrong business. You've got no business being a shaman or a shamanic student or doing any kind of higher level work in any field of endeavor, be it spirituality or anything else. So why this book? Why not a feel-good book, just to kind of get you warmed up? The work we're involved in, the Toltec path specifically, is ancient. You've heard me talk about parts of this before. I'm adding a little bit more tonight. This ancient work comes to us through Atlantis, right? You've heard us say that the Toltec tradition is that their ancestors escaped an island in the Atlantic Ocean that had a disaster and sank, and they escaped on boats and came to North America. And here they are. Depending on whose book you read, 12,000 to 15,000 years later. So, like a true scientist, we'll call that 13.5 thousand plus or minus 1.5 thousand years ago. Because why not? We can. What's important to realize, though, is that this work at the time of Atlantis was already ancient. Humanity, in its various forms, has been here on this planet for a really long time. And I'm not just talking tens of thousands of years ago. I'm talking many hundreds of thousands of years ago. So, compared to the true history of intelligent beings doing work on this very planet, 15,000 years ago is a drop in the bucket. That's not long at all. It seems longer to us right now because we've lost memories. We lost writings, not enough survivors from various disasters, and blowing up a continent through stupidity and arrogance is just one of many disasters. The previous version of a destruction after a golden age came with nuclear war, mostly in what is now the Middle East into Asia. It was where that nuclear war was centered. And we're talking many tens of thousands of years ago, if not somewhere about 70 to 100,000 years ago. And even that wasn't the original crash after a near golden age. And we're not going to go back that far. But the work that we have, Atlantis was the most recent near golden age for humanity. And so we're going to go back that far. And we're not going to quite do what the old ancient map makers would do, where they would draw a line on the map and say, beyond this, here be dragons, don't go there, right? That was a cop-out. They could have just said, unknown territory, we don't know what's here. But they chose not to. So Atlantis represented a pinnacle at one point in its process of a number of thousands of years. A pinnacle of spiritual knowledge and development, of technology, of working to help transform humanity into something far beyond even the capabilities they had then, which are far beyond what most humans can relate to today. The Toltecs of North America are one of the primary repositories of Atlantean knowledge for the transformation of humanity. And for those of you wondering, yes, this is very relevant to E.J.'s book, E.J. Gold, The Human Biological Machine as a Transformational Apparatus, especially into why E.J. wrote this book, how you can use it and do your work, and why I'm asking some of you to read it. So, the Toltec culture, actually I like to think of it as a subculture, because Toltecs were present in many cultures. As you know, the Toltecs are not a genetic race. We can't do a DNA analysis and say, ah, you were Toltec, 18%. Toltecs, the Toltec knowledge spread over all of North America and included people who came here to North America to study from South America, from Europe, Africa, and several parts of Asia. Both the Chinese and the Indians were here. And possibly other Africans, we know.
How about Egyptians?
Yes, at one point. Egyptians, of course, were also descendants of Atlantis. Egypt was an advanced Atlantean colony long before the collapse. There were much, much older pockets here on the North American continent. That's actually where the original Atlantean settlers had come from.
Egypt?
No,
Oh.
there were pockets here on
Got it.
North America where the Atlanteans came from when they first settled Atlantis. The North American connection, they'd kind of moved on. They had left some places abandoned. There were a few outposts here. And there's other reasons for that we won't go into tonight. I don't. This isn't a history lesson. This, you know, it is, but it isn't.
Mhm.
So the Toltecs seem to hold the most complete set of knowledge of what was Atlantean, specifically regarding one key aspect of their spiritual work, which was how to transform humans into something higher for all the various reasons we do that, which we'll get to later tonight. So that's what the Toltecs hold. This work in the Toltec lineage is all about transforming humanity, not just individuals, but also groups and whole continent worths and whole planet worths of humanity. To do this work requires us to go beyond the limits of our physical bodies and the normal mind of a human. The analogy that's used of transforming iron into steel. Iron is very strong, it's very hard. It's also very brittle and can break easily under certain conditions. Compared to the Copper Age and the Bronze Age that came before it and the Stone Age, iron was considered amazing. It would cut through the old bronze or brass or copper weapons of your enemies the way a hot knife cuts through butter. And it was considered the pinnacle of metallurgy and weapon making and tool making, and it would revolutionize humanity. Until somebody figured out steel. Steel is iron combined with carbon and a few other trace minerals to create something that's A, stronger than iron, B, it's harder than iron, and very, very crucial, C, steel is also more flexible than iron. You can bend it and it'll snap back.
Wow, I didn't know that.
You bend iron up to a point and boom, it breaks.
Oh.
No snapback, right? So your iron battle axe, it works great until it shatters. Steel is much less likely for that to happen, although it can. There's a famous story from Scotland. Robert the Bruce, one of the great heroes of Scotland, who became a Scottish king when they finally threw the British out, the English, to be clear, threw the English out. They were in a battle, and this was still in the day when the king went to battle. And Robert the Bruce got isolated on the battlefield with the flow of everything going on. And one of the big English knights in his big heavy war stallion with his full armor saw him and said, I'm going to end this right now. I'm going to put this little pipsqueak out of our misery. And he went charging across with his big horse and his armor against Robert the Bruce on his little war pony in very little armor.
Guess who won?
So the way he won is what's funny and historically important with respect to what can happen with steel is his horse was smaller and lighter and with less armor. He was more maneuverable. So he starts one way and he doubles back at the last minute, and the English can't turn that big war horse that fast. There's this thing called momentum. And down came Robert the Bruce's axe right on the guy's head, wearing a metal helmet and everything, and splits the whole head in two.
Oh.
And about this time, some of Robert the Bruce's knights had seen his, oh my God, the king, and they went running to his rescue. And they get up there worried that he might be dead, and he's sitting there going, I've broken my good axe! My good axe! I broke my good axe! So yeah, even steel can break when you split an English knight's head.
He was pissed about his axe.
I broke my good axe! Scots on the battlefield were not to be taken lightly. Let's put it that way. So, from the standpoint of iron, with its inherent limitations, converting yourself into steel is a good thing. Oh, wow, this will be great. I'll be twice as strong. I'll be 5 times as flexible. I can make sharper weapons. I can make harder, more productive tools. Oh, this is great. Yeah, sign me up. I want to go from iron into steel. Okay, great. Hop in this fire. What? You want me to, You heat the iron red hot or even molten. You throw in the stuff. You bring it out. You pound it out. And you fold it, and you pound it, and you fold it, and you pound it. And you do this many times, and you burn out all the impurities, because even most metals still have some impurities in them. That's called burning off the dross in blacksmithing and metallurgical terms. And you add in the good stuff, and then just keep heating and pounding it, tempering it. And you can even get steel to a point where it undergoes a change from steel into something else that they call Damascus steel, because the ancient sword makers in Damascus, in what's now Syria, mastered a way of producing steel that to this very day nobody can duplicate exactly. It transformed into some other form of steel. And they do a spectroscopic analysis on it. And they know the exact chemical formula, but the way it was made was something different. You could take a Damascus steel sword and bend it over like this. So the sharp tip down to the hilt and go boing, and it comes right back. And it'll cut right through the steel swords of the Europeans of that day. And then there's a famous story of one of the kings, for lack of a better word, in the Middle East, who was when they first went there, they weren't really fighting that much, the Europeans and the Arabs. That fighting came later. And he demonstrated, after he cut through the European steel sword, and then demonstrated the bendiness of it, then he went over to a silk brocade wall hanging, and he sliced it down like a razor knife.
Oh, wow.
It was still so sharp it could do that after cutting through a steel sword. And of course, the European swords tried to cut that and just rip, tear, just like mincemeat,
Mangled
right?
it.
Yeah, mangled it, totally. So we cannot make that kind of steel today.
There's magic in it.
Something, yeah. So from the standpoint of iron going through that, it's going to be like heck, because you're being heated to red hot, and then you're being pounded under a sledgehammer and an anvil. Of course, nowadays in commercial, it's a big press, right? The big industrial presses do this over and over, not just once. And then when it's all done, the steel's like, oh wow, this is cool. Look at me. See how groovy I am. I'm bendy and flexible and sharp and strong, and I'm cool, right? But it had to go through that process. And that's the analogy for the spiritual work that the Toltec path is all about. We talk, oh, we're going to upgrade our consciousness. That sounds great. Sign me up. I have to do what? I got to go in this room with a shaman dude for a week, and every day he's going to zap me with radiations from the higher planes. Yeah. The target of those radiations is your higher bodies. And then that trickles down to your physical body. And there's heat, and there's agitation, and there's discomfort in the extreme. There's discomfort in these reading assignments I give you. There's discomfort in a lot of ways. One way I want people to think of this discomfort, and this is going to morph into the book here, trust me, is it's a lot like burning off the dross. It's burning out our impurities. We're seeking to create ourselves into a higher level human being, a complete human. And that means leaving out lesser things that no longer serve. So we burn them out. We don't always know where they are. We've done a really good job of hiding these things down in our shadow self. All the things that either we don't like about ourselves, or that somebody else has said that they don't like about us, or are bad, quote unquote, from a standpoint of a culture or a society, which, if you pay any attention to that, to your journey is over, if you pay any attention to what society as a whole is saying right now, because that's changing weekly, is what's good and bad. So if you let society decide your course and decide your path and make your day-to-day life decisions for you, your work is done in this lifetime. Your incarnation goes into the books as a waste. If you're letting somebody other than you and your higher essence and your holy guardian angel, which is your connection to the divine, your essence and your holy guardian angel are, that's who should be guiding you. My job in all this is to guide you on the path. That's what any teacher in any legitimate school can do. That's all we can do. I can open the door, but you have to walk through it. And I can tell, no, not that door. That's a dead-end door. This door. It's like Yoda pointing to the cave, telling Luke Scott, go in there. Does no good for Luke, for Yoda to go in there. Yoda already dealt with his shadow self hundreds of years ago, right? When Yoda finally died, he was what, 800 and something? According to the Star Trek literature, the Star Wars literature. No, Luke had to go in and deal with that. And then his first time, of course, he flunked. In one of the famous scenes from the second movie. So that's what the teacher does. We point the way, and then you have to walk the path. You have to transform yourself. I guide. I can open the door. I can ramp up the higher plane radiations. But if you don't do the work, if you run away screaming at the first sign of higher plane radiations, then that's a waste. That incarnation becomes a waste. Let's take a short break here and talk about who's online. Who we got?
Well, we got Melody Johnson with
Hi,
the
Melody.
Gremlins.
And
Hi,
the Gremlins. Hi, Stellan.
Hi.
Hi, Brennan.
Yeah. Hi, guys.
Who else we got?
We got Muad'Dib.
Hey,
Muad'Dib.
Wadid.
Hi, Serenity.
Hi, Serenity.
We got Dennis on.
Dennis.
Hi, Dennis.
Thumbs up.
And we have got Maria.
Maria.
Hi, Maria. No, Patricia.
No, Patricia. She was not well on Saturday, which is why she couldn't come to the class. And Will was moving,
Yeah.
so I expect him to be under a pile of boxes somewhere right about now. Okay, and that's it so far?
Yeah, and Muad'Dib says, we haven't ran away yet. I don't think we're going to.
Yay, what a team.
That's like at the start, earlier in that Star Wars movie, Yoda's talking to Luke, and Luke says, well, I'm not afraid. And Yoda's response is classic. It's like, you will be. You will be.
That sounds like a Golden Eagle frame.
I give full credit to Master Yoda for that one.
That'd be a good shirt.
What?
Something to do with you will be
Yeah.
afraid.
No, I don't want to rip. I got plenty of ideas for shirts. We're not going to have to rip anybody else's ideas off. But okay, hi everybody. Thank you for tuning in. Anybody else who watches this later, thank you. I'm going to read something right now. This is a quote from the book by E.J. Gold. And this is E.J.'s right. If we want to discover our chronic, I'm going to stop right there and explain the chronic. Because if I don't explain it and you're into the book, you will be asking shortly. E.J. has gone to great lengths in most of his writing to use as specific terminology as he can, which is why he uses obscure words that many of us have to look up in a dictionary, because they are much more specific and precise than the words that you might find in USA Today newspaper. Does that thing still exist? And he defines terms in a certain way, and he will specifically avoid certain terms. So he wanted a term that talked about the boundary between the sleeping state and the waking state. And he goes to a lot of effort to define the sleeping state and the waking state. And so he uses this term, the chronic, to talk about the habitual response that our organism makes when we're bumping up against the waking state. If we want to discover our chronic, all we have to do is go into horizontal sleep and have somebody wake us up in the wee hours of the night or sometime in the pre-dawn and observe our first reaction. So you don't know when they're coming in, what night it's going to be, and all of a sudden somebody comes in at 2 in the morning. Literally, you go, wake up, and you're like, right?
Yeah.
That is your chronic. So when you start doing that during the day because somebody's pushed a hot button or you're in a situation that makes you feel uncomfortable, that's a clue
Okay.
to your transformation. That is a clue that you're right there. If you can retrain your organism to not do that and instead to observe and do something else, that's how you transition into the waking state. That will be our chronic. The machine doesn't want to enter the waking state. It resists it right up to the last moment. But once it's in the waking state, it can't imagine what it was ever doing in the sleeping state. It can't imagine why it preferred the sleeping state, why it developed a defense mechanism against this wonderful waking state, and may even wish never to return to the sleeping state again. But when it has returned once again to the sleeping state, it can't imagine what it ever saw in the waking state, and it wants to stay where it is now just as powerfully as it wanted to remain in the waking state a few moments or hours ago. There is a physics term that describes this exactly. Anybody know what it is? Anybody online know what this is? It's inertia. Okay. Inertia is an object at rest tends to remain at rest, and an object in uniform motion in a straight line tends to remain at uniform motion in a straight line unless acted on by outside forces. So our organism wants to stay right where it is. You force it into a new state, it wants to stay there. You force it back, it wants to stay there. It doesn't like changing. Okay. So the chronic is that state of being where we don't want to cross that threshold. This is the aircraft going through the shock wave. Gets through the shock wave and flying becomes easy and wonderful because that's the physics of what's going on. But there's always a but. Recognizing what's going on in those moments is difficult and challenging. I have a couple notes I jotted down earlier. Yeah. So this all is falling into the category of why you should care about this book and why I care about having you care about this book and why I'm having you read it and what it can do for you. So when you're in that chronic state, the most common reaction is anger. Not the only one, but that's the most common. And if you allow yourself to feed the anger, to rationalize the anger, to justify the anger, you're feeding the ego state, which is the defensive mind of your physical side of your organism, what EJ calls the human biological machine. That's what you're doing, is you're allowing this lower level mind to rule. Any ego reaction, whether it's pure anger or something else, in these circumstances is doing the same thing. It's having the same effect. So, not that anybody I know in this room was ever guilty of this before, but that driving need to always be right. Can be an ego reaction that's part of your chronic, that's preventing you from getting into the waking state. To always be in control. This is an outer what was that? Oh, that's the bird squawking. To always be in control, that need to not let anybody else be in control. This was me years ago, right? That's an outer manifestation of the ego who wants to control and not give up control to the essence. So we've trained the ego to think that anybody trying to take control is a threat, a true threat to your very life. And that's why it's so hard to help the ego move into the waking state. It's why it's hard to train the ego to respond to the essential self rather than the wants and desires of the physical body, of the biological machine. Anytime you feel a need to be validated. I just want validation. I just want you to acknowledge that my opinion is valid. Those kinds of things. Anytime, this was another one that a lot of people I know, and myself included, you think you are being treated unfairly. Even if you are, if you focus on that, you will spiral up into an anger state usually. And you can see how a lot of these examples link together. Those are signs and symptoms of your chronic. And you are only hitting up against the chronic and inducing those states when you are right up to the boundary of the waking state. This is the equivalent of the aircraft going through the sound barrier, shock wave of the sound barrier. This is your consciousness going through the chronic into the waking state. When you start experiencing these reactions and going through reading this book and working the exercises EJ describes. That's how you shift into the waking state. This is why shamans and teachers everywhere are creating a variety of conditions that will help identify your chronic, which are parts of the dross that needs to be removed if you are going to successfully transform into the higher potential human being that you have the potential to become. So this is why we care about this. Is we have to learn. This book teaches how to identify what's part of the mind and reactions and instincts of your biological machine, and what's coming from your essential self. The low-level exoteric example of something like this from the Toltec literature is, oh, be impeccable, right? Be impeccable with your word. Be impeccable with the way you behave with others. You know, and that's the same thing we teach in grade schools and Sunday schools all over the world. Right? No, be impeccable. Be honest. It's a lot tougher when the honesty is between you and yourself about your inmost thoughts and desires, and nobody else can see them. Well, most of the world can't see them. People who are working from the higher planes can. And that's where teachers start to call you on your BS and say, I don't care if you like being the life of the party and always having the jokes and always having your giggling, cackling laugh, or always having to be the first one to speak. That's covering for a weakness. You think you're the life of the party? Okay. Your teacher may ask you to take a vow of silence. You have to go to work and do your job, then you speak in the work, but whenever you come home, whenever you show up for a shamanic event or a class, you have to take that vow of silence. You can't talk. You can write, you can still communicate, but you're not allowed to do that kind of thing. And it could be flipped, right? Perhaps you're the loner, and you're perfectly happy running off to Alaska and being a hermit. You know, you're just like, sign me up. Give me the log cabin in the wilderness and some fishing poles and guns to hunt and a little garden plot, and leave me the heck alone. I had my route planned. I was going to do that. It's like, I'm the loner, leave me alone, I don't want to be bothered, and get on your path. Right? But I don't like working with other people. Other people are jerks. That was me in the aerospace industry. How could you do that? Make me work with idiot Jim Bob over there? I learned a lot from a couple of bosses in aerospace. I had bosses that I learned how not to be a manager, and I had bosses where I learned how to be a good manager. And I had bosses where I learned how to blackmail somebody into doing the right thing, or trick them into doing the right thing. Well, Arlen, you can do one of two things. This really neat job you had in a science lab, building a satellite all by yourself. I had that job. I had started working. I was getting to build a little satellite all by myself. Nobody else. He said, you've got a year and a half, build this thing. Yes. It lasted a month. And then they jerked me out, put me over here. The way they did it, it's like, well, you're not going to get to do that job. We're basically firing you from that job. So you can be fired from the company, or you can come over here and work for idiot number 14, or you can come over here and be the manager, and idiot 14 will work for you. Okay, fine, I'll go be that manager and let all the other idiots work for me. Best thing that ever happened to me, one of them in my aerospace career, you know, years down the road, but at the moment I was just so angry. I was up against my chronic, let me tell you. But I learned. Yeah, I learned how to manage. I learned how to trick people.
Oh, beware.
You haven't figured that one out yet, huh?
No, I'm just kidding.
No.
I'm not kidding about the beware. But
Yeah, well, but you should already know that I know how to trick people.
I know you do.
I'm still waiting for it.
He hasn't figured it out yet.
I
has he?
know.
Okay.
Where are you right now?
I'm not sure actually.
You're not in Riverside. You're
No.
not in Paris.
Mm-mm.
You're here in Mount Chester.
Yep. Oh, so you. Okay, I get it. All right. Proceed, old shaman.
Welcome back. The trick worked. The realization on his face is classic.
Well.
No, there's one time I had a bunch of people working for me, and I went to each one of my best engineers in each little subcategory and asked them if they would be the lead engineer, which they knew was one step short of becoming a manager. And like all 5 of them refused in each of the different areas, you know, like the control system, the power system, the telecommunications system, you know, and so on. They all refused. Okay.
You have a choice.
No, it was much more subtle than that. About once a week, maybe every other, over like a 2-month period, I would go to each one and say, hey, I need some help with something. Can you do this for me? Oh, okay. And the next thing, and you know that thing you did last week, I need you to do that again. Just generate this report for me. And then over the course of the 2 or 3 months period, each one of them independently, I gave like 3 or 4 assignments to help me.
So
Because
they're
I'm overworked. I'm in my first big management job and I'm overworked. I just need help.
you tricked them.
And then, because I knew that at a certain point in time, we had to publish the official program organizational chart of who was doing what. And I had been told, you know, a month ago that I had to have people fill these jobs. Okay. So then I published my official organizational chart, which each of the 5 people filling the jobs, which they had turned down and said they refused to do.
So they found out they were doing the job.
So they found out that they'd been assigned formally, and then the whole world knew. One of them found out when somebody else called them up to congratulate them. What? Slammed the phone down, and I sent this thing out, and then I just kind of went to my office, put my feet up, had my beverage, and was just waiting. I'd even pulled in 5 chairs and sat in a semicircle, waiting for the influx. Oh, you're here. Come on, have a seat. Oh, you're here too. Yeah, everybody, come on in, have a seat. Close the door. We'll talk. What's up? Blah 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 blah. You assigned me this, right? Right. Yeah. I'm not doing any work. I'm not taking this. Oh, you don't have to. Well, what do you mean? Well, you know, this and this and this, these things you all be doing, that's the job. You've been doing it for 2 months already. I'm just giving you credit for what you've already done. Shock and surprise and horror. It's like, oh, they know they've just been tricked, right? Royally tricked.
They've been had.
They've been had. And they're just like, and you all got up and walked out silently. And that was the last of it, the discussion.
Smooth operator.
I love it. They didn't know it then, and I didn't know it then, but they were up against the chronic. Right? You just didn't know it. They didn't even know that something called the chronic existed back then, nor did I. This was last century. Last century? No, last millennium. It was way last millennium. It was so long ago. You do realize last century and last millennium are the same thing right now for the next 81 years.
Okay.
After we get past the year 2100, I can't use that joke anymore. Last century and last millennium being the same.
If there's still a world.
Yeah, well, we'll see. Or if we aren't on a different calendar system. We'll see. So this chronic that we're up against, we all have them. You know, the people who don't like working in groups like I was, we have to get thrown into situations where we work in groups in order to become, remember our goal. Our goal is the complete, balanced, total human being. Dreamer, stalker, warrior, and all the subcategories thereof have to be imbalanced. We can't allow the emotional reactions, the survival reactions of the biological machine to drive the cart. This would be like having in Coyote's book, the Toltec Survivor, he's got the picture of the cart, the horse, the driver, and the passenger, right? The passenger is the essence. The cart is kind of the body, our physical machine, but not all of it. The driver is our ego, and the horse is really the rest of the biological machine. So the goal of the essence is to get from point A to point B. But he doesn't have the reins. The driver's got the reins. So the essence has to talk to the ego and convince it to do something, and the horse has to be trained to do what it's told. Otherwise, you don't know what's going to happen. Which means the horse can't be halfway down the road and say, oh, grass, and whiz off the road and go over in the field because he's starving, because nobody thought to feed the horse for 3 days. The horse has to be trained. He has to know, I get food in the morning, I get food in the evening, and sometimes we might stop halfway to where we're going and get a little snack in the lunch. I get water on regular intervals, and I get to go do my work. I don't get beaten excessively. Just friendly little love taps when I get cantankerous. And as long as I do what I'm told, I never get beaten. That's what the horse has to be thinking. And he gets pushed, right? You have to be strong. You have to work the horse regularly. This is the physical training I've been talking about. And martial arts is the highest form of physical training that we know. One of them. And then the ego has to be trained that because he gets to do the details of the driving, but as far as setting destinations and the big picture stuff, that's coming from the passenger, the essence. So you train the ego that the essence isn't a threat. And then the whole system works. And every time you're up against a situation of the chronic, that's the ego going through a survival reaction. Oh, I'm not comfortable letting somebody else cook the meal because I do it better. Yes, and if you can't be replaced, you can't be promoted. That was something I used to tell people. I learned that early on. If you can't be replaced, you can't be promoted. So if you ever want to get out of the kitchen, you need to train your replacement. Anytime you get a new job, train your replacement
Or trick
or trick them.
Oh, I thought you said cook them.
'em. No.
No, we're not. We're at Mount Shasta. We're not at Donner Pass. They had almost as much snow this last winter at Donner Pass as they did during the year that Donner Pass became famous from the Donner Party. Cannibalism, if you don't know, go look it up. So the chronic states are a clue. And this book contains a great deal of wonderful information about how to go about doing that. I think this is where I want to go next, is to a different book. Are we ready for this little batch? Okay. I'm regressing back to our warrior study a couple months ago. This is one of the books I briefly mentioned, but we didn't go through in depth. We went through the Book of Five Rings, we went through Sun Tzu's The Art of War, we went through Karate, The Energy Connection, we're part of it anyway, and then we went through Living the Martial Way, out of Oregon. This is called Mind Over Matter. The subtitle is Higher Martial Arts. I'm going to read a couple short passages here because it's directly related to this idea of transformation. Martial arts emphasize both mental and physical refinement. All of them emphasize cultivation of the body and cultivation of the mind. The contents of these two major kinds of training must be intimately conjoined and simultaneously fostered in order to finally attain a high level of cooperation and coordination between the operations of mind and body. This is exactly what the Toltec work says. These two are inseparable, meaning refinement of the body and refinement of the mind. He goes through examples here. Refinement of mind, refinement of spirit, cultivation of essential nature. We're talking about the essential self here. And refinement of consciousness. Toltec work again. There's no accident that this sounds like the Toltec work, because China had sent envoys to North America. We find ancient Chinese petroglyphs on rocks throughout different places in North America. And we know that the style of the writing used is one of the more ancient forms that stopped being used like around the year 1200. So this is way, way, way pre-Columbian. Refinement of consciousness, all defined by modern people as different levels and facets of the interrelationships within the domain of vital spirit and depth psychology. He talks about refinement of the body, the physique, refinement of vitality and energy. All belong to different facets of what modern people refine as the material components of the body.
What was that last sentence you said? It complements the body before the word complement?
Okay, I gotta go back through it because I was skipping around in a paragraph here. Within the domain of the material components of the human body.
Okay.
The position of refinement of consciousness in the theory and practice of martial arts is utterly critical. It pervades the fundamentals of training in martial arts, as well as the most advanced content of their highest level. This is the technical and theoretical core and quintessence of martial arts. To abandon this is tantamount to throwing away the living soul and fundamental work of the techniques and theories of martial arts, leaving only low-level external exercises, meaning a sport or exercise, but not a refinement process. And he goes on and talks about this. Yeah, that's enough from there. So when I was going through this recently, I found that and I realized that would be perfect to set as this kind of a segue into EJ's book here, because it's refining the consciousness. It's using some of the same Toltec terminology that we use. And it's another description of exactly what we're going for. We put our physical body through things, we put our mental, emotional, and spiritual bodies through things, and that's how we transform. We're putting ourselves in the fire. And when we find those places where we're most uncomfortable, we should be happy about that. Because that means we're up against our chronic. And we've just found one of the pieces of dross that we have to clear out to make that transition into the waking state a little smoother. So that basically is what EJ is saying here in this book of how many hundreds of pages? 100 and something. I can tell this EJ wrote this book when he was younger because it's in fine print. 159 pages. Yeah. Did anyone see the movie Avatar back in the olden days? All right. A higher conscious goes down into a specifically prepared body and interacts in a world that was incompatible to the higher level consciousness. We may have to do that movie Avatar on movie night sometime. They're so right with stuff in there. I don't have that. I'll have to get that movie somehow. If anybody watching has the movie on DVD, the original Avatar movie on DVD, bring it over and we'll do a movie night. The other movie I want to do soon is Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. It's a nice segue also from the martial arts warrior philosophy into the higher aspects. But the movie Avatar, just to refresh your memory, is they're on another planet. They've run out of countries on, they meaning the Earth control people and US government that's morphed into a planetary government, have run out of countries of lower technological peoples to invade and steal the resources on Earth. So now they've expanded off planet. They found another planet they can invade that's inhabited by intelligent beings, but these intelligent beings aren't as technologically advanced. They're basically in kind of a Bronze Age, Iron Age kind of a thing, and they don't have lasers and ray guns and rockets and aircraft or things like that. And the atmosphere is very, very toxic to humans. Humans can't breathe this air. They have, obviously the life on the planet has a very different physiology. Oh, but they got resources, so we're going, right? So what they found is they kidnapped a bunch of the beings and they did a DNA gene splicing breeding program to produce these alien human hybrids where we can then, using technology, transfer the human consciousness into one of these hybrid creatures. And the breeding had to be done very specifically for each individual human. So that's the backstory. And then they get there, and there's a whole series of events. But basically, it would be like going into a video game and being the player in a video game and then coming back out. So that's where the name Avatar comes from. And that's like our essence coming down into these human biological machines, which have been modified over deliberate advancement over the eons to try and have a nervous system and energy bodies that are more compatible with our eternal essence so that we can work in the physical planes with all the capabilities of the highest and do things here. So we're trying to transform our essence at the same time as transforming our bodies and the core nature of what it means to be human. That's what humanity is engaged in. That's what the Great White Brotherhood is engaged in. And in order to do that transformation, we have to go through these alchemical processes. Like being uncomfortable. Everybody who does this work will have moments, and more than one, where they get to a plateau and they think they've made it, and then something happens and they're uncomfortable. And they say, yeah, this isn't my path, I'm running away. And then they say, this isn't my path, I'm running away to Alaska to be a hermit. And, oh, this isn't my path, I'm going to go back to one of those feel-good fluffy things. And you go back to a meeting and you sit and you listen to the people talk who are so enamored of the fluffy stuff. You go, these people don't have a clue. You've seen enough with this work that you can't go back. Okay, this is the matrix, right? The red pill, the blue pill. Your eyes and mind have been opened. You've glimpsed beyond the veil. You know the truth of the universe. At this point, we're kind of stuck, right? How could I go back and be a blue pillar at this point? Not possible. Go have a 9-to-5 job, customer service somewhere, listen to idiots complain.
You take out your sword.
Yeah, like I said, I wouldn't last. No, I would just get up and walk out. No, you can't go back. You can't go back. All of you out there in internet TV land watching can't go back. You know, right? You've seen enough to know that there's more to the universe than what you see with these physical photon receptors. And you can't go back. All you can do is go forward. There was a mountaineering expedition in the Himalayas once, and I don't remember which peak they were climbing. It might have been K2. It wasn't Everest. It was, but one of the other big ones that's hard to get to. And Everest is actually it's hard because of the altitude and the elevation. It's not hard technically as like K2, and a number of the others are much more challenging climb. And these people were having a lot of trouble. And they got to a certain point and they were like, okay, we're not going to make it. We gave it our best shot. We're not making it. We have to go back. And just then, there was an avalanche. And their route back was wiped out. And they had no way down. Yeah. Their only hope of survival at that point was to go up to the top and come down a different ridge. So all of a sudden they were put in a position, well, either you lay down and die here, or you jump off this cliff that you have no way of getting down. You didn't have near enough rope to go down this way. Or you go up to the top that you just said you couldn't do because you were out of gas and it was too hard, and then you go down the other.
Up against their chronic.
Yeah. So they went up. They can't go back at that point. There is no going back. You either give up and die or you go on. So they went on. They made the summit. I don't know if they were the first person or the first people on this writing, but it was like a significant thing. It's been 20 years since I've read about this. So this is old. Last century. And then they came down this other route and they all survived. Oh, what a great thing you did up here. And it's like, well, we weren't gonna, we had to, you know. They didn't lie about it. They just, yeah, we were left with no choice.
It got real.
Yeah. So that's what the chronic is. That's what these reactions are. So when you're sitting here in a class and you're having these kind of ego reactions, why is George clicking the mouse that way? It's driving me nuts, and it's all George's fault. Why is that cat laying there like that? Doesn't she know somebody might have to walk through there and they'd trip and hit the cameras and the lights? Why is that person cackling? Laura. That's all chronic. And so what this book will get into is how do you use those kinds of responses and reactions of our biological machine as a tool to more easily access the waking state and transform the essence. The human biological machine as a transformational apparatus. You don't have to go out and buy machines and computers and hook up electrodes and do any of that stuff. Everything you need is right here. It's all right here. We got all we need, and this is the instruction manual EJ has written for how to do that. So I'm going to talk just a little bit. I may read a couple samples in chapter 1, maybe up to even in chapter 3, and then we might come back to this a little more next week. Well, we will, because there's more points I want to make in here. So chapter 1, the situation. This is good because what he does is he uses an analogy of life in a fish tank. Right? You know, like a big fish tank like those ones when you go to the certain Asian restaurants are really big. They have a big aquarium and they got the coral and the rocks and they've got the octopus and the eels and they got that and they got, it's exactly what EJ's talking about here. So you're in this fish tank. There's some fish that swim around the surface. There's some at the middle levels and some are only on the bottom. Right? And so you're in this very small enclosed environment. And that's all you know. The top swimming fish almost never go down to the bottom feeders and interact. They don't go hang out. Hey, bottom feeders, you want to go hang out at the bar? Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. No, they don't interact. And there are some fish that don't interact with anybody else. They're the loners. And then in this enclosed environment where you're swimming around, you've got the water, you bump up against this hard transparent membrane that's really hard to see beyond, but it's possible if you train your eyes, they can look out and start to see shapes. It's it, vague, unfocused shapes. And then what if one of these fish that he calls redfin starts to question this reality? And he starts paying attention to the shapes and moving and realizes there's something beyond our little world, our little universe. And then EJ's comparing that to our physical planet in this whole universe that we've now developed instruments to look out and see. But we're in this thin layer of air and water, and without major effort, that's where we sit, and that's where we live and die. And we send people out above that just a little ways, and they don't go very far. Until they give us the Tesla technology and allow us to have that, then we can go far in our physical bodies. But that's the analogy, right? How do you interact? And then what if Redfin starts to uncover this knowledge? And he's so excited, there's this world out there. And he starts to ask the other fish, what have you seen? Then he finds out none of the other fish has seen or thought about anything except the next feeding time. Yeah, but there's these shapes, and the shape comes close, and all of a sudden the food appears. That shape out there is giving us the food, and nobody's ever thought about that, right? They all think he's nuts. They shun him, they chase him away, whatever, right? So I've gone through that many times in this incarnation, whether it's realizing that there's a spiritual side of the universe, it's seeing the auras on people, on plants, on animals. It's that whole epiphany about natural medicine. Right? What? I can cure heart disease and cancer with nutrition and vitamins and a few herbs and lifestyle, and then add in the energy and all of that, right? And my ex and all my friends, they would look at me and like move away from me. You know, I said, but wait a minute, there's this and it. You know, I've seen friends and relatives die because they would not engage or even consider that changing their lifestyles and their diets and doing something other than what mainstream medicine said could help them. You know, so I've been through that. I'm being shunned because I examined the universe and had a new realization that most people don't share. And that part of his analogy in this book is very, very real. He's not making that enough. See if there's any exact quotes I want to read from chapter 1. No, that's the essence. He's just setting the stage. So then he starts talking about, well, what can this fish do about it? You know, and he talks about what is an accomplishment of significance. Okay, what can you do? So even if you realize there's this world out there and nobody wants to talk to you about it, what then? And what he walks through is a trail of logic that says the only thing he can do is change himself inside. He calls it what EJ is calling an inner transformation or an inner evolution. Okay, so that's one of the keys. You look at me today, nice, handsome fellow that I am, and you look at a picture of me from 15 years ago, other than my hair being shorter and less gray in the beard 15 years ago, on the physical surface, I don't look that much different. Length of hair and color of hair being superficial, right? My core essence on the outside looks the same. The changes that I've made, the abilities that I've been able to gain have been through inner work. Inner work combined with using external physical work as a transformational tool. So this is one of the things I've used martial arts for over the years, is to help facilitate that process. This I think I was talking about last time. It was when Zen combined with the martial arts in about, from China moving into Okinawa and Japan about in the 500s AD, so roughly 1500 years ago, was when Zen in China and Asia took off. They made greater spiritual progress, they made greater physical progress by combining the two than either did alone. Yeah, warriors got up to a certain level of ability and hit a plateau, and the spiritual work got up to a certain level and hit a plateau, and that's where it was. And then you combine the two, and then both of them, then their abilities and accomplishments shot up. Wink, several quantum leaps by combining them. That's why part of my encouragement is you got to add a physical practice to what you're doing. But still, the goal is an inner transformation. We create new neural pathways. We create new links to our energy bodies. And so he walks through the process, which is hypothetical but very realistic, for what does this fish in a fish tank, what can he accomplish, and what can happen, right? And of course, a lot of it you have to take on the eternal perspective. The work we're doing in this lifetime isn't just for this lifetime. Although we can accomplish a lot more in this lifetime than anybody out there thinks we can, and way more than what you think you can, until you get into this and realize, holy moly, look at how much more there is I can accomplish in this lifetime. Some of EJ's writings and Coyote's writings talk about that fact that we're taking many lifetimes worth of progress on evolving our essential self and compressing it into one lifetime by using these various shamanic techniques. Whether you're here in my school, or whether you're down in Coyote's school, or whether you're over in EJ's school, we're all tapping into the same source. There is only one source. And whichever path you're following, whether it's my version of the Toltec path, or Coyote's version of the Toltec path, or EJ's version of the path, it's really just, you're looking at that light from that same source coming through the different facets of a gemstone. So the light comes out, the EJ facet, you've got the overlay, it's the Jewish art dealer, businessman, salesman, jazz musician overlay, right? Who dabbles in quantum physics and makes cool stuff, like the boxes we have over here. You look at the Coyote facet, and you're getting Coyote's version of the Toltec work, which also includes the Indian yoga overlay and the Western magic overlay. But it's still the same source. You come to my school, and you're getting the Toltec work with the quantum physics and the physics and engineering overlay combined with the martial arts and the healing overlay. So I do more with the healing work than either Coyote or EJ does. I do more with physics and martial arts than either of them do. So those are kind of my overlays. And so we use the tools we know. EJ uses the tools he knows to help you transform. Coyote uses the tools he knows to help you transform. I'm using the tools that I know to help you transform. But the work is the same. And it's important to understand that the Toltec work, we have things that no other path does, whether it's a Native American path, or whether it's an Asian path, or a European path, or South American shaman. We have things. The Toltecs have done a better job of retaining more of that ancient knowledge than anybody else I know of. Now, that doesn't mean there isn't an isolated pocket somewhere in the Himalayas that has something we don't. They probably do. But in terms of the total volume of work, we have a formula that has been successful many, many times, up to and including the point of the entire population of a whole city transcending and leaving this physical plane altogether. That's part of the Toltec possibilities. We don't, none of the teachers or schools that I know that are legit have just one path. They don't, none of them have just one overlay. Now, one of the things Kachora has taught Coyote and Coyote has taught me is this need, and I've taught you, and you'll hear it again and again and again, is there's not just the red magic in this. Toltecs were here, they were a North American native path, but we don't just have a red path. The red path is the path not just of the red-skinned natives, it's any path pertaining to bloodlines. So my Celtic work, I bring in bits and pieces of my Celtic work, because that's my bloodline. We have, through the DNA, a resonance with our ancestors that way. We have our soul lineage. Where has our soul gone and incarnated? I've been a samurai warrior. I've been a Chinese monk in the Himalayas. So I have strong connections to the Asians. That's why one of the reasons I studied the Asian martial arts, and I have a strong affinity for it. It's been there, done that. It's not my first rodeo. That's all part of my red path. Then we talk about the black magic. There's different ways of looking at black. Black magic can be the evil where you impose your will on others without their permission. That's the negative aspect of the black magic. But any of the workings that are done in dark, there's certain, like making of anthroposophical medicines, where herbal medicines are turned into something more powerful by doing the preparations, the alchemical preparation, under moonlight. That would be part of the black magic. Even the martial arts could be called the warrior aspect, that could be called part of your dark magic. It's the yin-yang symbol, half black, half white. Half the universe is that yin, that darkness. We, to be complete, we have to walk through the darkness. We go to other planes. Let's say the shaman is going to do a soul retrieval, and a dark entity has captured someone's spirit. We go get them back. And if you're afraid of the darkness and you're afraid to go in there and deal with the dark entities, and you have that fear, you're not going to be successful, and you might get eaten.
It's shadow work.
Yeah, this is shadow work. The work that we all have to do on our shadow self is part of our black magic. Then we have our green magic in the Toltec path. This is the healing work. This is the use of nature. Working with nature, working with the planet. So all the healing work I've done, whether it's the energy work with the Akadwa or my herbal thing, we taught the herbal class last weekend, all of that would fall under the green magics. And you each have to develop your red magic, your black magic, your green magic, and your white magic. And it's not just, as I jokingly say, for white magic, do good, avoid evil. And if you can't avoid it, you have to kick its butt, right? The white magic encompasses anything you do that is an act of purity or devotion, adoration, service. So you take it upon yourself that you're going to volunteer at a soup kitchen. You're going to do that once or twice a month. Every month you go down, you spend a day, you work at the soup kitchen. Purely volunteer effort. You just go, you serve the people there. These are the homeless, these are the downtrodden. That's what Christ did. He was shunned by the Pharisees and the Sadducees, who were the two sects of high priests in Israel at that time. And they tried to chastise him for consorting with the evildoers, the sinners. And he had a whole bunch of answers for that. They're found in a book that we call the New Testament of the Holy Bible. If you want to know what WWJD, what would Jesus do? Go read that. In fact, I highly recommend a version of the Bible that is called the Red Letter Edition, which you can find, where everything Christ said is printed in red ink. So it's a little bit more money to produce these, right? They got to run each page through the printing press twice, once to get the black ink, and then when it's dry, they go add the red ink. So it's a bit of effort. But we don't have to guess. What would Jesus do about these darn foreigners trying to get into our country to have a better life? He would tell you to welcome them.
Mm-hmm. With open arms.
And I can't quote chapter and verse right now, but it's there. So go read it. Think maybe Donald Trump is watching this. Maybe I should send him a Twitter thing. Hey Trump, hey Mr. President, go watch this.
It's too complicated for him. You have to do real simple and draw pictures. That's what his advisors do. I'm not kidding.
I believe you, and I'm not going to go there. I don't expect me to see me in the White House being an advisor to our current president anytime soon.
You would take his head off. In about 2 seconds.
I would never get through the screening process. No. So, chapter 2 then is mostly about what do we do with that information. And it points to inner evolution. And chapter 3 is about our potential for inner evolution. And walks through the trail of logic on how he transcends his ordinary destiny. And it's this eternal perspective across lifetimes that becomes important. And then we get into chapter 4, which is a little bit, well, it's not that much longer. Chapter 4 is called The Human Biological Machine as a Transformational Apparatus. Oh, wait a minute. What's the name of the book? What's the name of chapter 4? Name of the book? Name of chapter 4. Oh, I'm confused. Not. One of the things EJ has at the beginning of each chapter is a highlighted paragraph that is kind of summary. So chapter 1, the situation. The highlighting says, the impartial it doesn't say that. The impartial observation of the limits of life in a fish tank can provide us with an important clue as to the real nature of our planetary situation and a basis for asking ourselves what the meaning and purpose of life can be. Yeah, it's just the age-old question. What is life and why are we here? Why do we have one? Chapter 2, which is called What to Do. If our world is actually related to other worlds, then we must ask ourselves what we can accomplish that will be significant and of objective value and consequence beyond its limited confines. Chapter 3, Our Potential for Inner Evolution, says, the key to accomplishing something of objective value lies in our potential for inner evolution. Special methods can teach us how to use our body, mind, and emotions to transform our essential selves. Because it's the essential self that's the target for evolution, not our physical self. Although there's some reciprocity there. Each needs to evolve so they can meet and create a link to this higher performing human on the physical plane. Human biological machine as a transformational apparatus, chapter 4. Contrary to popular belief, inner transformation does not produce behavioral and psychological results that can be easily recognized from the outside. Real results are of an entirely different nature. There will be some. People who knew me 20 years ago, if they were to meet me today, they'd think, wow, you really mellowed out. Not as much as a hot-headed, hot-tempered a-hole as you used to be. But I can turn it on when I need to. You know the old expression, nobody ever forgets where they buried the hatchet, right? You know where that comes from? It comes from native tribes in the Northeast, which when they would have a peace treaty, they would meet someplace and they would dig a hole and they would each bury their tomahawk, cover it up and have a treaty. But they never forgot where they buried that. Meaning, if things shift, they know right where to go dig it up. Right? So yeah, I've put away, for the most part, the barbarian. I've made it this far in life and I have not put anybody's head on a pike yet. I'm not the hot-tempered a-hole of my youth and middle age. Middle age being relative because I'm not really there yet. My slightly younger days. But I am barbarian, and I know how to use it. Any questions? Yeah.
Is there a way when one is not, say, triggered, that you could purposely go up against your chronic for evolution?
Yeah. I don't know if you like the answer to how you do that. You have to join an esoteric school and do the work that's assigned to you by your teacher. And then do more of it. And 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 there's techniques that I've taught, like the vitriol. Do the vitriol more. Okay? You accelerate your transformation that way. All those techniques, for those of you, and not all of you are, I'm aware, that went through the level 4 class, there was 16 different techniques. Do them. Do several every day. You've been taught a lot. Do it. Push yourself. And then when you think you're ready for more, come see me.
Okay.
But yeah, that's the whole point of doing this work, is to get to that point. I mean, like I said, I'm not the one transforming you. You're the one transforming you. I'm just showing you where the door is. The door I've been through. So, I know the trail. The other analogy I use from time to time is the old Wild West wagon train movies, right? Every wagon train movie has exactly the same plot, just different actors playing the roles, right? The people want to leave back east because they didn't have a future and go to the promised land out west where there was all this free land. You just go out there, steal it from some Native Americans and live on it, right? And you had to get there, and it was only 2,500 miles by wagon train to get there. So they'd get a group of people together, you know, anywhere from 20 to 50 families in a group of wagons. Couldn't get too big because then, you know, by the time you you circled your wagons for the night. By the time you get fully spread out, it's half the day, and then the guys in front have to just make a circle again. You never get done. So they went in these small 20, maybe 40 would be the biggest you'd see groups of wagons, and then off they'd go, and none of them knew where they were going. So what they do, they'd hire the crotchety old mountain man guy. Right? He'd been out there trapping and fur trading for 20, 30, 40 years. He knew the way, they knew the rivers, they knew the mountain passes, they knew all the dangerous spots, how to avoid the quicksand, and you don't go down that road no matter what that cheap map you bought back east says, because there's no water down there, hasn't been water down there for 20 years, we go over here now, that kind of stuff. So that's who they hire. Then you get in the middle of the movie, the first time they have trouble, they ignore the advice of the mountain man. Somebody or several somebodies die. And then they go back to listening to the crotchety old mountain man, and everybody else makes it to California, Oregon, or wherever they were going. Oh, you had a love triangle? Some kind of love story going on along the way? Always a fight with the Native Americans of some kind. And that's a wagon train. And in that analogy, your teacher in an esoteric school is filling the role of the crotchety old mountain man guy. And the first time you're up against your chronic, you blame the mountain man guy. First time you're into a situation where you're not comfortable, you start to ignore the mountain man guy. You blame him for taking you the wrong way, when in fact, he's taking you exactly the right way because you said your goal was to get to the promised land called transformation. Transcendence is the Toltec term. That's what you said. You want that? Fine, I'll guide you there. Don't come blaming to me when you're up against your chronic. You asked for it. You signed on a dotted line that said you wanted it. So, here you go. How serious are you? You're the talkative one who can't shut up. The teacher says you need to have a vow of silence for a month. And that pushes a hot button because now you can't use that cover. Right? One of the layers just got peeled away.
Mm-hmm.
You don't like working with people, you want to run to Alaska or somewhere else? Guess what? You have to go work with people. That pushes your hot button and you're in your chronic, well, too bad. You asked for it. That gap, that lack, that chronic, it's dross. It's either something we have that's holding us back, it needs to be burned away, or it's a gap with a capability we haven't filled in yet. And we can't go on until we do. Either get rid of what's extra or fill in what's missing. You said your goal was transcendence. To get to that higher plane. So do it. Do the work. And especially when it comes to working in groups, what the Toltecs found is You get these groups of people working together, you will go a lot faster and you will gain capabilities that you absolutely positively will not do by working alone. It is absolutely impossible to do some of the things that Toltec work can do unless you work in a group. So that's a long-winded way of answering your question. Any other questions? Any questions online?
Oh yeah, I forgot to put it on myself. Nah.
Okay.
No questions.
All right. Okay, we're going to continue talking about this book next week. We're going to start with chapter 4, which means it will be helpful for those who choose to participate to have read at least up through chapter 4 by next, and then we'll probably push on through, I don't know, at least a third of the book next week. So if you haven't started reading this would be a good time. Make it a priority. You slept last lifetime. Any other questions? Okay, so for those of you who are formal students of the school, we have a student meeting this coming Thursday, 6 p.m. You should have an email with a link, or you can come here and be part of the live portion of the meeting, right here in this very room. For those of you who are not formal students of the school, and you like what you're seeing and are interested, then you need to contact me. Okay, if there's no other questions or comments, we will terminate. Thank you for tuning in. See you next Monday. So let's stop streaming.